Hey guys, Spudknocker here, as always, and today we're going to take an in-depth look at using the AGM-65E laser-guided Maverick in conjunction with the DCS World A-18C Hornet. Now, over on my Discord server, the Spuds Discord server, which is always linked in the description down below, there has been some confusion and some frustration as to how to use the AGM-65E with the FA-18. Now, I completely understand and sympathize with that confusion and frustration because there is a lot of juggling the HOTAS controls and switching the sensor select switch back and forth between the DDIs and pressing the correct buttons in the correct sequence in order to be able to shack a target with your laser-guided Maverick. And there's a lot that can go wrong, and if just one little piece of the puzzle goes wrong, that missile will either not launch, or it will launch and then go stupid and not hit your target. And so that can be extremely frustrating in either situation or in either outcome. So this video is all about minimizing that frustration as much as we possibly can. Now, using the AGM-65E, like I said, is very complicated, and that complication just skyrockets as soon as you get into a combat situation in a multiplayer server where you have to keep your situational awareness up, look out for threats to your own aircraft, look out to make sure you don't get into a mid-air collision with friendly aircraft, making sure you're keeping track of threats around you, potential interceptors, SAMs coming up at you, all these kinds of things, and then throw that at night, like our last nighttime mission, and the complication goes up dramatically. And so using the AGM-65E really requires a lot of practice in a very controlled and sterile environment before you then move over into that complex and very interesting dynamic situation of a multiplayer server or a big coordinated mission. So I hope this video helps you guys out, and I think it should, and get you guys up and running, firing laser-guided Mavericks at targets in DCS World. Now, of course, the laser-guided Maverick has a very interesting history behind it. The first version, the AGM-65E, was actually not able to be designated by its own aircraft. It required buddy lasing in order to use. The AGM-65 Echo 2 variant, which we have here in DCS World, even though it's called the AGM-65E, was the first laser-guided Maverick to allow itself to be actually designated from its own launch aircraft and allow self-designation for that missile. Back in the early parts of the Iraq War, as well as the war in Afghanistan, and as well as the Greater War on Terror, F-14 pilots flying as FAC-A's really liked working with F-18 Hornets firing laser-guided Mavericks. Because of the fact that the weapon is powered, it makes it incredibly accurate, far more accurate than a laser-guided bomb actually, and allows for hitting very small and tall targets such as watchtowers and certain levels of buildings, things like that are much more difficult to hit with a laser-guided bomb when you have an actual powered missile like the AGM-65E. So you can read all about that in books about the use of the F-14 Tomcat in the War on Terror, and it's a very interesting read whichever book you pick up, and definitely gives a lot of insight as to how much coalition aircraft used buddy lasing in the early stages as well as the middle stages of those conflicts. And also something to note here, all of that buddy lasing and all of this use of the AGM-65E is all within very permissive airspace. If you're in airspace where you are being shot at quite a bit, things like that, there's SAMs coming at you, there's interceptors coming at you, you probably might want to go with a different weapon that allows you a little bit more of a fire and forget ability to it. And that's why in the second video we're going to put out today, we're going to take a look at using the AGM-65 Foxtrot, the IR guided version of the Maverick, in conjunction with the Lightning targeting pod. And that allows you guys to have a little bit more of a fire and forget ability with the AGM-65 to allow yourself a little bit more survivability on the battlefield. So stay tuned for that one as well, and it'll be linked in the description, of course, and hope you guys enjoyed the video, and of course, fly safe as always. Alrighty guys, now that we're in the office and we've got the jet up in the air, we can go ahead and get started with our LMAV tutorial here. Now, a quick side note before we get started with the tutorial. Flying at 12 noon here in the 2.5.6 version of DCS World is far more bearable in my opinion. Things look a lot more realistic lighting-wise, things aren't nearly as washed out, not nearly as boring looking, And so I think that this can be incorporated into missions a heck of a lot more, having, you know, early afternoon, late morning time of day missions that will look a lot better, a lot more visually interesting, and may even incorporate it more into my videos. So that's why we're flying at 12 noon today, so in case anyone was wondering. And I don't know if this really shows up so much through YouTube compression and all that, but go ahead and hop into your jet one day at 12 noon here and try it out for yourself and see if you notice a difference in 2.5.6, because I think that I certainly do. So anyway, we're orbiting a standoff point away from our target here, and we'll go ahead and get the jet set up and ready to go. Now, using the LMAVs in the F-A-18 is kind of a delicate balance of using the sensor select switch to get things set up very quickly in your dive down to your target before you release your missile. And because of that, it can be a little bit confusing, and it can definitely take a lot of practice to make sure you kind of get that shuffle down correctly, so that way you don't mess something up. Because if you do mess up one little thing, that Maverick could just go stupid, or not even come off the rail, or you may just be looking at your target waiting for it to hit, and it never does. Because keep in mind here that there is no time to impact timer with an LMAV, which is a little bit annoying, and definitely find myself hoping and praying that I did everything correctly, and then, you know, a few seconds after I think it should have hit, boom, it goes ahead and hits and shacks the target. So definitely be patient when you're using LMAVs, and definitely trust your practice and training with those LMAVs as well. So let's go ahead and get started here with setting up our jet as we come back around towards our target point. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and arm up our jet and make sure that we're fenced in, so that way we can defend ourselves from any threats that pop up, like an interceptor or something like that, while also being able to bring our offensive punch to the fight. So let's go ahead and go into air-to-ground mode and bring up our wing planform onto our left DDI, and we'll go ahead and select our Mavericks. These 111s down below the wing planform on our stores page indicate that we are in fact carrying LMAVs, and so we'll go ahead and set the laser code for those guys by going to UFC code, and we're going to work on 15885 today. So keep in mind that something a little interesting fact here is the Mavericks, the AGM-65Es that we have modeled here in DCS, are in fact the Echo 2 variant, which allow for self-lasing from the launching aircraft. The original AGM-65 Echo 1 variant did not allow for this, so kind of a neat little side fact. And we'll go ahead and come on over here to our FLIR page, and of course we will go ahead and select our laser designator to the armed position. We'll box our trigger so that way our trigger can act as our firing function for the laser. And we'll go to the UFC and go to our laser designator, and we'll select 1585 to match between our laser designator code and of course our LMAV code down here. Now keep in mind here that we are going to need this to switch back and forth between our sensor select switch between the left and right DDIs. Now, keep in mind, sensor select switch is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to the nomenclature of the controls of the F-A-18C. It is, in fact, a DDI selector, not necessarily a sensor selector. So, if I bring the sensor select switch over to our right-hand DDI to slave my TDC to my targeting pod at the moment, we of course get this diamond up here in the right-hand corner of that DDI, which denotes that our sensor select switch is now on that DDI. Now, we are not selecting the targeting pod, we're selecting which DDI the TDC is slaved to. So if I had gone and went ahead and took this targeting pod and put it over here on our left-hand DDI, the sensor select switch would still be denoting a select on the right-hand DDI, and it would not follow the targeting pod over here to the left. So just keep that in mind, and that can definitely reduce some confusion when it comes to using the targeting pod. So next thing we'll go ahead and talk about here is talk about how to get the targeting pod onto your target. So we've got a couple armored vehicles out here at the Bandar Yezhsk airport, and that is at a very nice geographical point that we can find, which always helps. So as we come out to our waypoint here, we'll go ahead and pop the autopilot off, and we'll roll the jet out. And we'll pop her back into autopilot just to aid myself here as I go through this tutorial with you guys. So next thing we're going to do is throw the FLIR pod into FLIR mode, because on the Greenscale DDIs in the F-A-18C Hornet, I find the CCD camera to not be of any usefulness at all. it just makes things muddled and hard to see. So that's why I always turn the targeting pod to FLIR mode right off the bat. Next, we'll go ahead and delete the stick down here, and we'll come on over to the SA page. And we'll bump the map out to about 80 scale here. And we know that our target point is at roughly about waypoint 1. And so we do also know that Bandar-e Jask is quite a bit of a geographical point that is very easy to pick out on a map. So you can either slew the targeting pod using simply just the point on the SA page, just like that. You see that little box moving around, and we can slew that right over waypoint 1. And we can see that in DCS world, the point is not yet rendering on our targeting pod yet, but it will soon. And if we zoom that pod in, we should be able to see it pretty quick here. Next thing you can also do, if say you don't have a waypoint set up on your target, is you can also go ahead and hit nap, and you can slew the targeting pod over a point on the map. Let's say we want to put it on this little bump on the coastline here, this little inlet on the coastline right here. We can see that on the map, and we can see that our little box denoting our targeting pod point is right there on the map. And of course the Bandar-e Jask Peninsula is right here underneath our waypoint 1 symbol, so we can go ahead and bump this guy back up and slew it back over our peninsula point. Yep, looks like we're no longer able to render it, but we can see more and more stuff rendering as we fly out there. And there it goes, rendering more and more stuff all the time. And we can now see the Bandar-e Jask Peninsula. And if we look on the map, of course, it is centered right on the Bandar-e Jask on the map. Now keep in mind here that the moving map in the FA-18, or any aircraft really, is not going to be exactly perfect. It's more for situational awareness and helping you navigate to areas rather than specific perfect points. It's always going to be a little bit off as to where exactly those points are in real life. That's true of airliners, of military aircraft, of private jets, of general aviation aircraft. It's just one of those things that it's not always going to be absolutely perfect. So keep that in mind as you're using the map to slew your targeting pod around. So we can now see Bandar-e Jask Airport out here, and we can go ahead and look at our HUD and see that we're about 36 miles out from our waypoint 1, which is of course over our target point here. Now we can of course use the RAID FOV switch to zoom our pod in. However, at the moment that seems to be a little bit bugged and doesn't always work. So we can go ahead and hit narrow FOV on the DDI over here. And we can see a couple armored vehicles on the Bandar-e Jask runway. So why don't we go for this center vehicle here, and we'll zoom her in all the way. Next thing we want to do is we want to hit TDC depress to select the point that we're looking at as a target point. So when we do that, we now get a diamond out here on the HUD, and we also get a timer counting down to the time when we're going to be in range for the Maverick to be fired. And you can always, of course, sweeten up that diamond and hit TDC depress again as you get closer and closer, getting a better view and picture of that target. So next we're going to come over and hit Maverick one more time, and now it's going to bring us to the Maverick page right here. And so once we have a target point selected with the targeting pod, when we uncage the LMAV, it's going to be slaved directly to our target diamond point here. And the way to do that is simply to bring your sensor select switch over to our left-hand DDI. It will automatically uncage that Maverick and slave its seeker head to that point, where it will then start looking for a laser designator shot on that point. So here we go. We're going to bring the sensor select to the left DDI, and boom. We can see it uncaged, and it brought that triangle denoting where that Maverick is looking directly down onto our target designator diamond. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing, and we're going to be doing that sensor select switch dance between the left and right. We need to now bring the sensor select switch back over to the right hand DDI, and then we'll press the trigger to start firing the laser. Now as we fire that laser, we can now see a solid box replaced to that small thin X, and that denotes that the Maverick seeker head now sees the target down there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and kill the autopilot once again. We'll put her into a little bit of a dive, and we'll bring the aircraft into full mill. And we're going to be increasing the speed. And as you can see, the increase in speed, this timer until in range is counting down faster and faster. Now, the more speed we impart on our FA-18, the better chance our Maverick is going to have to get to that target, and the more accurate it's going to be. The more speed it carries into that target, the more maneuvering ability that Maverick is going to have to allow it to hit exactly pinpoint on your target, as well as be able to fight any kind of crosswind. As we can see from the white caps down below, we do have some wind down there. So we'll start bringing the jet further nose down, and we're going to go ahead and pause it real quick and discuss one thing. Now, your target designator, or your scope for your AGM-65E with the laser designator spot in there, it doesn't need to be exactly within the crosshair of the Maverick scope. It can be down below. Now, I wouldn't have it, you know, crazy off in different directions. That's just going to degrade your Maverick's speed, as it's going to need to maneuver more to get off the target. But if it's down below, like down here on this, you know, second scope tick down here, it's probably going to be just fine. And the Maverick's just simply going to nose down a little bit more. But like I said, I wouldn't be totally and completely off. That's more of a way to bring your jet in line with the target spot. So we'll keep on coming down here. And we're now in range as denoted by the Q on the HUD. And we'll go ahead and rifle. And we're coming off the target here. And we're coming off to the right-hand side of the target. The reason we're coming off to the right-hand side is because our targeting pod is on the left-hand side. And so because of that, we don't want to accidentally mask our pod as we fly off the target. Now keep in mind here that there is no countdown timer. We're kind of just running on faith here that that Maverick is doing its job. And keep in mind that this little dot that you see on the DDI with your targeting pod on it is the masking dot. So if this dot comes out and touches the edge of your DDI, you're going to mask your pod. And so masking means, of course, something gets in the way of the field of view of the camera, and as such, the laser will be blocked, and that Maverick on its way to the target will go stupid. Let's take a look at the missile. Here it comes. And shack. Cool. That's one kill. We'll go ahead and bring the laser out of firing mode by a tap on the trigger, and that way the laser will not overheat. So like I said, we can still see this masking dot is coming further and further and further down towards the bottom of our DDI here, telling us, yes indeed, the pod is going to be masked eventually if we keep flying straight. So keep in mind that you fly correctly so that you do not mask your pod. I believe in DCS world at the moment, it doesn't always work exactly, but it's still a good indicator. The further and further this dot gets away from the center of your field of view of the targeting pod, it will let you know that you are within a good angle to keep the pod from being masked. So we'll go ahead and come around here. And I'm sure, as you guys can see, it's kind of a lot of juggling between switches. The sensor select switch between left and right DDI there, as you're getting the Maverick ready to fire, as you're pressing down the trigger to allow the targeting pod to start lasing the target, and all these things. It can be a bit confusing, and when you are in a combat situation where there's missiles flying around, your RWR is beeping in your ears, you're also trying to communicate with your wingman over SRS, and you are trying to not get killed, make sure you're killing the bad guy and not friendlies on the ground. all these kinds of things, it can certainly get very, very hectic. And that leads to errors. So that's why it's always good to practice in a non-combat situation when you can. So we'll bring the jet back around here. And as you guys can also see, there is no time to impact marker for the LMAV in the FA-18 here, which can be a bit disconcerting because you're like, oh geez, I really hope I did everything right. And then finally you get a nice splash on that target and you're like, oh okay, I did it right. Awesome. Alright, let's look for another target here. Come on down the row. Where'd they go? Ah, there's one. Looks like they skittered off the runway. And we'll go ahead and select that as another target. TDC depress. We'll bring the nose on down. And we'll start firing our laser. And as you saw there, with that second reattack on the target here, the designated triangle for the AGM-65 doesn't always slave directly right to the target. It's still scanning around looking for a laser designator, but once you press the trigger here to start designating that target, it usually finds it pretty darn quick. Especially if you got your nose down on the target here, it'll snap right to it pretty darn quick. And as we can see, we've got a laser designator right in the middle of that AGM-65 scope right there. So we'll go ahead and continue on. We'll bring it back to full mill, build up some speed. We'll sweeten up our view on that target, pop her into point track, and we'll go ahead and rifle. And we'll make sure we come off to the right here. Came off to the left a little bit there as we got a little bit unbalanced. The aircraft became a little bit untrimmed. That's okay, that's going to happen. Just make sure you're anticipating it. And shack. There goes one M13. Alright, we'll build up a little bit more separation here, and we'll come back around for a retack on our next target. And the Lightning targeting pod is a pretty advanced pod, and as you can see here, you can kind of do some pretty fancy maneuvers, some pretty hard maneuvers, some hard turns, hold some G's, all these kinds of things, and it will snap back pretty darn close to the target point. Older pods like the Lantern pod and the F-14 Tomcat will have a harder time with this, especially if you don't have it in Q designated mode, but that's another topic for a different video. So I'll build up some more separation here. And as you guys can see, as you get good at this and you keep practicing, you keep practicing, it becomes pretty darn second nature. It is quite a bit of fiddling around with that sensor select switch, as I've said, you know, a couple times already, but once you get it, it's pretty simple. Now we're really just building up some separation here to allow myself to find another target. We got two more armored vehicles to engage. And unfortunately, unlike other variants of the AGM-65, like the IR guided or TV guided variants, you really cannot ripple fire the weapons. They are not fire and forget weapons. Looks like we got a bead. Nope, those are trees. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Oh, there we go. There's a vehicle. As I've said in other videos before, looking through a soda straw targeting pod to find targets isn't easy by any stretch of the imagination. Things go wrong. You misidentify targets. You attack tanks that are already destroyed. All these kinds of things. During Desert Storm, there was a study and it showed that quite a few Iraqi tanks sitting in the desert were bombed multiple times by coalition aircraft after they were knocked out, because a tank on the desert floor that is sitting there in the hot desert sun through a FLIR targeting pod is going to look very similar to a tank that's still alive. It's just a matter of fact. So we're depressing TDC to select another target point. And as you can see, our Maverick is still searching for a laser, so we'll go ahead and give him a laser by squeezing our trigger. And there we go, it acquired the laser, and we're almost in range, increasing our speed to give our Maverick the best chance we can possibly give him. And we're now in range. As we come down here, we're going to go ahead and rifle. Now keep in mind, you always want to make sure your laser is latched as you're using AGM-65Es, because just like a laser guided bomb, if it loses that laser, even for just a split second, it will not retain a memory of where that laser was and search for it again. It will just go stupid and potentially hit friendly forces, or potentially even worse, civilians on the ground. We really want to avoid that collateral damage at all costs, of course. And we can watch that missile. And as you can see, AGM-65s are not the fastest missile around. They definitely slow down quick, and you'll find yourself outrunning your own AGM-65s pretty often. And there we go, there's another shack. We'll turn off that laser to avoid overheating and damaging the pod, because that's a lot of energy that goes into the lightning pod to actually fire that laser. And that creates a lot of heat within the pod, and it can damage the components of the pod either immediately or over time if the laser is abused in any way. And as a result of that, the Lightning pods that we find on modern fighter aircraft, especially Lightning II and even Lightning III pods, are very modular in design. Ground crews and technicians can open up the side panels of the pod and pull out different line replaceable units and shove new ones in there to fix broken parts on the line very quickly. And that allows Lightning targeting pods to be very quickly fixed or updated and brought back into service for the next sortie as quickly as possible. But even with saying that, we don't want to abuse the laser in our Lightning pod. Coming around. Probably should have turned off to the left there, coming off the target, as if we did, we would be able to unmask our pod even quicker to be able to find a target and re-engage even quicker. And we're coming around, coming back towards Bandar-e-Jask Peninsula. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and roll out past the peninsula to give myself a little bit of extra time to acquire a target. There we go. I guess I didn't need as much time as I thought. We'll go ahead and TDC depress, set that as our new target point, and we'll go ahead and roll on in. Oh, there we go. Reacquire our target. Pod's not always perfect, but it does a pretty darn good job. And we'll go ahead and fire our laser. Maverick has acquired the laser, and rifle. And we're coming off the target to the right hand side, making sure we're not masking that pod. And we're pulling up. Like I said, our masking dot isn't entirely perfect, but the closer we have it to the center, the more and better shape we're in. Let's see the missile. Oh, he's getting close. And shack. Alrighty. Well, it's time to head home. We're almost out of gas, and we need to find a tanker. So, that's how you guys use the AGM-65E. I know some guys over on the Spuds Buds Discord server have been a little bit confused as to how exactly to perform the switchology to fire the AGM-65E in the most efficient and deadly way possible. And I hope this video helped you guys out and cleared up any confusion you may have about using this weapon. It is a very interesting weapon with a very interesting history behind it and a very interesting use. I would recommend that you do not use this in super dangerously and well-defended airspace. It's more for permissive airspace in which you have plenty of time to be heads down in the cockpit, searching for targets, looking for targets, and not have to worry too much about things being shot up at you. So I hope you guys liked the video, so please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot, guys.